In a tall building in downtown New York, a man named Daniel stood anxiously by the elevator doors on the 15th floor. Clutching a stack of papers, his heart raced. Today was the day the board would meet, and he had a speech prepared that felt like his last chance. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and as it slid open, Daniel hesitated. Inside stood the members of the board, their faces masked in uncertainty and indifference. They were the titans of the company, the ones who decided his fate. He knew he had to act fast. Anyone could fall out of favor in this cutthroat world. He took a shaky breath and dashed inside before they could leave. A voice shouted. It was Susan, the chairwoman, hurriedly walking towards him. Daniel pressed the button to keep the doors open, feeling a rush of relief. He had always respected Susan. She had the kind of confidence that made others feel small yet inspired at the same time. As she stepped in, she shot him a quick smile. Thanks. Daniel nodded, forcing a smile, but inside he felt butterflies fluttering. This might be the only chance he had to impress everyone before the meeting. The elevator began its descent, the familiar whirring of machinery echoing in the small space. Daniel was still holding the papers tight to his chest, his fingers turning white from the pressure. This speech was a chance to show them who he really was, a chance to change their minds. Susan asked, tilting her head slightly, her interest piqued. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he felt a storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. He had always been the quiet one, the employee who kept to himself while others drew attention. But today he had to change that. He had to show them that he deserved to be more than just a name on a document. I think we can all agree that the company needs a fresh start, Daniel finally managed to say, his voice shaky but growing stronger. I know I'm not the loudest in the room, but I have ideas. Susan raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. As the elevator continued its slow descent, Daniel took a breath and began to share ideas that had been bouncing around in his head for months. He spoke about innovation, about adapting and taking risks, and about how they could harness new technology to reach a younger audience. As he spoke, something inside him shifted. The nervousness began to fall away, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. Look, he said, his heart pounding, I believe we're at a crossroads. If we don't adapt, we'll get left behind. The elevator stopped suddenly on the 10th floor, the door sliding open. A few employees entered, noticing the group inside and offering quick hellos. Daniel realized that they were within earshot. He felt exposed, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he continued, fueled by the sense that something was building. There's a chance to bring fresh ideas to enhance our brand and visibility. We can start outreach programs to young entrepreneurs, truly becoming a part of the community, he said, looking at Susan and the others. He could see their expressions begin to shift from skepticism to intrigue. Daniel, you're sounding almost presidential, another board member joked, but the laughter was light and the tone supportive. Daniel felt a spark igniting inside him. As they reached the ground floor, Daniel realized they had been having a real conversation, something he never expected. The elevator doors opened and the board members filed out, but instead of being dismissed, he felt a sense of possibility. They didn't just move on, they lingered, glancing back at him. Let's keep this chat going, Susan said, her voice steady. A wave of adrenaline surged through him as he nodded. Absolutely, he replied, his confidence swelling. He walked out of the elevator, feeling taller, freer, ready to face what lay ahead. In the conference room, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. Daniel watched as the board members settled in, exchanging glances that suggested they were still thinking about their conversation. His heart raced, but he pushed the energy down, focusing on the task at hand. As the meeting began, the chairman spoke about current challenges the company faced, outlining the steep competition and market trends that were changing rapidly. Daniel sat quietly, occasionally jotting down notes, all while rehearsing his speech in his mind. Then it was time, the moment he had spent countless nights preparing for. Excuse me, I have something I'd like to add, he interjected, his voice steady and clear. All eyes turned to him. The board seemed intrigued, leaning in just a little more. He stood up and walked to the front of the room, clutching his papers. I know I'm new to this, he began, but I believe we need to shake things up. For the next few minutes, he shared his vision. He painted a picture of a revitalized company that embraced change, a company that listened to its employees and engaged with the community. He spoke about the potential growth through innovation, the excitement of fresh outreach programs, and the importance of building a brand people could trust. As he spoke, he could see that the room was captivated. Faces that had once seemed hard now softened. Eyes that were clouded with doubt began to shine with possibility. Every word he felt more powerful, shedding the timid layers that had visibly defined him for so long. When Daniel finished, the room was silent. It was a heavy silence. He could almost hear the gears in their minds turning. Finally, Susan broke the stillness. You've presented some compelling ideas, Daniel. Daniel hesitated, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. Because I understand both sides, he said, gesturing to the others in the room. I've been on the ground, working day in and day out. I see our challenges, but I also see our potential. With that, he took a breath and felt something shift in the room. More heads nodded in agreement. The board seemed visibly impressed, and he could sense their curiosity and respect blooming. The chairman cleared his throat and leaned forward. "If there's one thing this company needs, it's vision. And I see that in you, Daniel." He could hardly believe it. As the meeting continued, they openly discussed his ideas, and each member began to voice their support. It was the shift he had hoped for, but he hadn't expected it to feel this explosive. At the end of the meeting, they voted. The air was thick with anticipation as they raised their hands. It was a moment that felt stretched in time. Daniel's heart thudded in his chest. This was everything he had wanted, everything he had worked for. As he counted the votes in his mind, he held his breath, unwavering in his belief that he'd succeeded. When it was done, the chairman looked at him, that knowing smile creeping across his face. "Congratulations, Daniel." His heart soared. All the years of hard work, all the moments of doubt now felt so small in comparison to this victory. As he stepped back into the hallway, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. He had taken a risk, held that elevator door, and it had opened to new possibilities. He could feel the energy buzzing in his veins, bright and unyielding. Daniel walked back to his desk, a sense of pride swelling in his heart. He was no longer just an employee. He was a leader, and he knew he would embrace this role with everything he had. This was just the beginning. The elevator doors slid shut with a metallic thud, and just before they locked tight, a hand shot out, stopping them from closing. Daniel stood there, his heart pounding like a drumbeat in an empty hall. He was alone on the 15th floor of the corporate tower, but today was anything but ordinary. Today was pivotal. Today, the board was meeting to decide the future of the company, and his future too. If the doors hadn't opened again, he would have never summoned the courage to step inside. But somehow he had managed to hold the door, and now, standing face to face with the board members, he felt a mix of dread and determination. Inside that small space, the tension was palpable, and Daniel felt like the very air was charged with opportunity. "Thanks for holding the door," Susan, the chairwoman, said with a hint of surprise in her voice. She stepped in, her expression shifting from businesslike to friendly. Daniel couldn't believe it. He had always idolized her from afar, admiring her confidence and the way she commanded respect without saying much. When had he become someone worthy of her gratitude? As the elevator descended, he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. They were all in there, the titans of their industry, experts and veterans who had spent decades climbing the corporate ladder. And here he was, the quiet one, the guy who blended into the background. The guy who had both dreams and fears bottled up inside. Susan asked, turning her sharp gaze toward him, and for a fleeting moment he caught a glimpse of curiosity in her eyes. I think we could bring a fresh perspective," he stammered, trying to steady his voice. The truth was he had something meaningful to share, but speaking it out loud terrified him. His palms began to sweat as he gripped his notes hoops of paper he had rehearsed with over and over again. He just needed to push through to let the words seep out. "I'm thinking about growth and transformation," Daniel continued, feeling the pulse of his blood quickening. "We're at a crossroads in this industry, and we need to adapt." Susan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. The elevator chimed softly as it stopped on the 10th floor. New people entered, and Daniel felt the urge to retreat back into the walls. How could he possibly command the attention of the entire board? Yet the moment stretched out, and he couldn't let the opportunity slip away so easily. "Imagine integrating new technology," he said, leaning against the panel as every eye shifted toward him. "We could build community partnerships that align with our branding. People want something more than just a product, they want a connection." In that cramped elevator, the words flowed from his lips with surprising ease. Maybe it was the pressure, or perhaps it was the thrill of standing in front of influential figures, but he felt the life sparks igniting with every word. He could see Susan's interest shifting, her brow furrowing, her lips tightening into a contemplative line. "Daniel, you're making some compelling points," she said, her voice cutting through the noise of the moment. "But how do you see yourself leading this change?" His thoughts tumbled like marbles in his mind. This was it, his opportunity. He could feel the eyes of the new people weighing on him, silently judging. "I know it might sound bold, but I believe I can lead our team to new heights," he began, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. "I've studied our competition, I know what makes them tick. Most importantly, I understand our employees." He felt the shift in their energy. The steely expressions were giving way to something softer, more receptive. This wasn't just a pitch anymore, it was a manifesto, a promise. The elevator doors opened to the ground floor, and he was about to retreat into the shadows again, but as he turned to exit, Susan held up a hand. "Wait," she said, "let's not leave just yet." Daniel's heart raced. The board members stepped out during office hours, but they seemed interested, genuinely engaged. As they strolled into the conference room, he felt the atmosphere shift, like stepping from a cold, fluorescent hallway into a vibrant space filled with promise. Taking their seats, the board members looked expectant. Daniel stood at the front, feeling the weight of eyes upon him, and let out a long breath. "Gathering insights from employees can change our trajectory," he began again, this time with more conviction. "We need to boost morale and encourage innovation from the bottom up." As the words flowed, Daniel painted a vision for the future. He envisioned new branding strategies and community initiatives that would make the company not just about profits, but about purpose. Passion surged within him as he elaborated on potential partnerships with local startups, ways to innovate product lines, and techniques to engage the youth, a demographic they desperately needed to win over. "I want to create a culture of excitement," he declared, pointing at a chart he had prepared. "Think about the last time we had an outreach event, the energy." Everyone felt included, empowered. A murmur rippled through the room. The members exchanged glances that seemed to connote approval. Daniel had always been shy and unassuming, but this moment felt electric, like unfolding a tightly bound piece of paper to reveal a magnificent art piece inside. Susan leaned back, crossing her arms, a hint of a smile creeping across her lips. "You're very passionate about this," she said, her voice tinged with encouragement. "Let's talk about your role." Daniel paused, and the air stilled, thick with anticipation. He felt the gravity of the question, and for the first time he let the truth flow. "Because I care. I care about this company and the people who work here. Our success doesn't just come from the top, it trickles down." His heart thundered in his chest, and he felt raw, a piece of unfiltered honesty thrown into the corporate world. Sometimes all it takes in a place where facades reign is pure, authentic confidence. "Hold on," one board member, Mark, interjected. "What makes you think a young leader can take the reins when all of us have years of experience? You're talking about leading the charge, but you've not even been here 5 years." The question hung in the air, but Daniel responded without hesitation. "Experience is invaluable, but so is fresh perspective," he replied, summoning every bit of resolve he could muster. "Sometimes it is those who are willing to question the status quo who make the biggest impact." The room grew quiet, the type of silence one felt when a storm was about to break. Daniel maintained eye contact, holding the gaze of each board member as if inviting them into his vision. He saw them nodding slightly, considering his words carefully. Finally, Susan broke the silence. "We appreciate your candidness, Daniel." As they moved on to other discussions, Daniel felt a constant thrum of hope in his chest. Even if they had doubted him, he had made an impression. He had spoken truth into the room, and while the outcome was yet unknown, he had begun to pave a path. Days turned into a tense week. Each morning, Daniel came into the office with new hope, fueled by the thought that he might be heard, that maybe he had stirred something within the board. He spent time perfecting his ideas, gathering input from employees, and drafting detailed proposals. Finally, the day of the board vote arrived. Daniel settled into his seat. He could feel a knot of anticipation in his stomach. This was it, the moment where everything could change. The conference room felt electric as discussions commenced, with voices blending in and out like an orchestra warming up. And when they called for the vote, Daniel felt his heart race again, uncertainty buzzing beneath his skin. Hand after hand went up, signaling either approval or dissent. With each affirmative vote, his heart leaped until it was almost unbearable. They were saying yes, they were seeing him. When the final tally came in, Daniel sat frozen, not even daring to breathe. Then the chairman announced, "Congratulations, Daniel." A rush of emotions flooded through his veins, relief, joy, and disbelief, all weaving together in an exquisite tapestry of triumph. He had held the elevator door, and now he was holding the keys to a new future. As the room erupted in applause, Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. This wasn't just a victory for him. It was a testament to all the hidden struggles, the late nights spent gathering the courage to be seen, the moments he fought to find his voice. When Susan approached him afterward, a warm smile on her face, he felt a wave of gratitude. "You've earned this," she said firmly. He nodded, knowing that this was just the beginning. It wasn't just about a title, it was about cultivating change and leading with purpose. As he stood there embracing his new role, Daniel felt ready to move forward, a man empowered, ready to transform dreams into reality. He had held the elevator door, and in doing so, he had opened a new realm of possibilities, his destiny laid out before him, waiting to be seized. And he was determined not just to reach for it, but to thrive in it. The future was his to mold, and he would not let it slip away. The elevator doors began to close near the 15th floor, but in a split second, a hand shot out to stop them. Daniel's heart raced as he stood in the small, sterile space surrounded by the board of directors. He hadn't planned for this. Today was pivotal. The board was meeting to discuss leadership changes, a topic that hung like a dark cloud over the office. Daniel had spent restless nights imagining all the possibilities, and now he was face to face with the very people who held his future in their hands. "Thanks for holding the door," Susan, the chairwoman, said as she stepped inside, her tone warm but eyes sharp like glass. Daniel forced a smile, fighting the instinct to shrink away. He was always the invisible one in the room. It was as if he dissolved into the wallpaper, but today something was different. As the elevator descended, Daniel felt a mix of dread and anticipation swirling in his stomach. He was one of them, yet so distant. He clutched his folder tightly, his palms sweaty. His plans, his hopes, everything depended on this moment. "I think we need to talk about innovation," Daniel managed to say, his voice trembling slightly. The truth was, he had a radical idea simmering in his mind, a vision for the company that could take it into the future. This elevator ride was his chance to unearth that vision. Susan asked, raising an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in her gaze. The elevator glided silently downward, holding the board members in a compressed space. The tension was palpable, a living entity swirling around them. Daniel took a deep breath, gathering his confidence. I think we can adapt our strategies to engage a younger audience. We need to step outside our comfort zone. He could feel several pairs of eyes on him, scrutinizing his every word. He had spent much of his career learning from these people, always a step behind. But this was his moment. The elevator stopped on the 10th floor and a few employees stepped inside. They exchanged glances, sensing the gravity of the conversation. Daniel felt the walls of the elevator closing in. But instead of retreating, he stood taller, leaning into the challenge. We need to breathe new life, Daniel continued, taking the opportunity to engage the newcomers. Imagine outreach programs that bridge the gap between us and the community. Susan tilted her head, impressed. As the elevator resumed its descent, Daniel felt like he was soaring. He found strength in his words, turning desire into conviction with each heartbeat. His voice steadied. When they reached the ground floor, the door slid open, but Daniel stayed put, clutching his briefcase like a lifeline. Let me lead this transformation. Daniel felt the shift in the room. The atmosphere thickened with possibility, and for the first time he saw something else in the board members' eyes, interest. Let's talk in the conference room, Susan suggested, her tone shifting from curiosity to consideration. Daniel stepped into the light, following them with an unexpected surge of energy. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere changed again. It was an environment loaded with expectations and filled with the shadows of past decisions. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. I appreciate you all taking the time to hear me out, he said, his heart pounding in rhythm with his words. Today isn't just about me, it's about our futures. If we want to stay afloat in this changing market, we need to rethink our approach to leadership. Daniel laid out his vision methodically. He spoke about community involvement and innovation, threading statistics into his narrative that showcased the potential for tremendous growth. Every statistic seemed to echo the urgency of his mission. The board members listened, and for once they leaned forward instead of retreating into their shells of skepticism. Asked Mark, a member who had always exuded authority. Daniel's heart raced again at the direct challenge. I know what it feels like to be a part of the crowd, to be overlooked, he replied, standing a little taller. I understand our employees, the challenges they face. The weight of those words lingered in the air. The confidence he'd felt in the elevator shifted to tentative hope. Susan exchanged glances with the other board members. This is a significant shift, Daniel. We believe in data-driven decisions. Over the next few moments, the conversation morphed into a battle of ideas. Daniel countered questions with tangible solutions, breaking down plans into digestible segments. He brought up case studies, showcasing how companies had transformed through innovation and customer outreach. The more they discussed, the more he felt assured. As the dialogue deepened, he noticed something change in Susan's demeanor. She leaned back thoughtfully, an expression of contemplation painting her face. It was as if he had opened a door that had long been shut. Finally, Mark interjected, "You need to understand that leading has its challenges. You'll face opposition and your vision will be questioned." Daniel's response came to him effortlessly. "I'll listen," he said, his voice unwavering. "I know I won't have all the answers, but I'm willing to collaborate." The board began to nod, a wave of acknowledgement washing over the room. Each member seemed to share unspoken thoughts, and for a brief moment it felt like consensus was within reach. The meeting moved into the final phase, and Daniel could feel the tension and hope intermingling in the air. "I am excited about this opportunity," he said, a smile creeping onto his face that he couldn't suppress. Yet in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the fear that lingered around the edges. What if they shut him down? What if all this hope evaporated like mist? The vote was called for. Each board member's response would mark a pivotal moment in Daniel's life. As they deliberated, he sat in a sea of uncertainty, anxiety pooling into his stomach like a weight. The discussion shifted among the board members, voices rising and falling, words weaving in and out like music building to a crescendo. Finally, they reached a decision. Daniel's ears buzzed, straining to catch every word. As the chairman stood to announce the outcome, he felt time slow, anticipation curling around every beat of his heart. The room erupted in a mixture of applause and disbelief, and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He felt as if the ground below him had shifted, opening a new landscape of potential. This was it, the moment he had longed for. Joy flooded through him, washing away the anxiety that had lingered like a shadow. He had transformed from the quiet observer to the leader, grasping the opportunity he had fought for. It felt surreal, as if a dream had unfolded into reality. Once the applause faded, Susan approached him, her expression a mix of pride and respect. "Welcome to the team, Daniel." "Thank you," he replied, overwhelmed, his voice thick with emotion. As he stood there, surrounded by the excitement and hopefulness of change, Daniel felt a determination swell within him. This wasn't just a title, it was a chance to impact lives, a chance to lift others up, and to create a culture that thrived on innovation. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, brainstorming sessions, and the exhilaration of possibilities. He dived headfirst into his new role, often losing track of time as he worked to build the initiatives he had laid out. Every step brought its own challenges, but also its thrills. Daniel's vision began to take shape as initiatives blossomed. Employees flocked to him, eager to share ideas and collaborate in ways they hadn't before. He created opportunities for everyone to have a voice. He fostered a community within the company that encouraged creativity and risk-taking. Yet amid the excitement, challenges arose, bumpy discussions and disagreements surfaced. Daniel was met with resistance, echoes of doubt from those who clung to their established routines. Moments of uncertainty loomed in the shadows, but he leaned into them, recalling his promise to be a leader who listened. Through it all, he remembered that cramped elevator ride. The feeling of mustering the courage to hold the doors open had awakened something inside him, a spark of boldness he would nurture, never wanting to fade back into anonymity. Every challenge that arose was a chance to solidify his place as a leader, a chance to meet the concerns of his team. He embraced each opportunity, restoring faith and building a united front to face the future. Years later, as Daniel stood in a conference room reflecting on the journey, he marveled at how far he had come. The board members who had once scrutinized him now stood beside him, advocates for the vision he had set in motion. He had transformed not just the company, but his own life. With pride bubbling in his chest, he understood one simple truth. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of courage to hold a door open, to let opportunity walk through. And by doing so, by standing tall with confidence and purpose, a person could reshape the destiny that awaited them. That ordinary ride down an elevator where dreams collided with reality had become his defining moment, a launchpad into a future he once only dared to dream of. It had all begun with a single brave move, a hand reaching out just in time. And in that instant, everything changed. The elevator doors began to close, their heavy metal sliding shut with a soft whir. Just as they were about to seal shut, a hand shot out. Daniel's heart raced. He didn't plan to be here, holding the door open for the most important board members in the company, but here he was stumbling into the moment that would change everything. Inside, the board members exchanged glances, a mixture of surprise and annoyance crossing their faces. "Thanks for holding the door," Susan, the chairwoman, said, stepping in with a flurry of papers clutched tightly in her hands. Daniel felt as if the air had thickened with her presence. She was all business, all power, and he was just an ordinary guy trying to make a mark. As the elevator began its descent, Daniel's mind raced. Today was the day they'd discuss leadership changes, a topic that loomed over the office like dread. He had been preparing for this, rehearsing his words in the mirror. But that was before he had to share space with the very people who could decide his future. Susan's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp as a knife. The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "I think we need to innovate," Daniel said, his voice surprisingly steady. Each word felt like a step into uncharted territory, but he leaned into it. "If we want to stay relevant, we have to engage with the younger generation." He could feel the tension in the elevator shift. Each board member, usually so set in their ways, seemed to tune into what he was saying. As the metal walls enclosed them, Daniel braved the spotlight. "We have an opportunity here," he urged, his heartbeat synchronizing with each rhythmic ping of the descending elevator. "Imagine creating community outreach programs that not only improve our brand image, but also forge deeper connections with our customers." Susan, along with the others, seemed taken aback, and Daniel pressed on, fueled by an inner fire he didn't know existed. "We can lead the way." The elevator stopped on the 10th floor, and a few employees stepped in. Daniel felt their eyes on him, an audience witnessing this awakening. As the doors closed behind them, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was what he needed, a chance to be heard. He leaned against the wall, trying to gauge the changing moods of the board members. Susan regarded him thoughtfully, her brow furrowed. "Those are bold ideas, Daniel." At that moment, he felt the elevator's descent slow, a metaphor for his journey, perhaps. Was he really ready to take the leg? "We can start small," he said, the confidence building in him. The elevator lurched again, and the floors counted down in his mind like a clock ticking toward his fate. The weight of their scrutiny felt heavy, but he pressed on, his voice echoing against the metal walls. "Together we can redefine our mission," he said. As he spoke, the tension in the air shifted again. The board members began to nod, a ripple of interest moving through the cramped elevator. Finally, they reached the ground floor, and the door slid open. Daniel stepped out, absorbing the new energy flowing from the meeting. But then Mark, one of the senior members, stepped close to Daniel. He asked, eyes scrutinizing. Daniel swallowed hard. I see so much potential in this company." Mark pressed, challenging him directly. Daniel felt a rush of adrenaline. "I don't just want to lead, I want to inspire." Mark's expression softened slightly, a hint of curiosity breaking through. The board members exchanged glances that seemed to signal a turning point. "Let's take this discussion to the conference room," Susan said, leading the way. With each step, Daniel could feel anticipation coursing through him. This was his moment to shine, and he was ready to take it. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The crisp, sterile walls felt charged with expectation as he took a seat at the long table. Daniel could feel the weight of the board's gaze settling on him like a warm blanket, heavy but supportive. "I appreciate you all for considering my ideas," he began, the words flowing easier now that he was in a space meant for dialogue. "Our industry is evolving, and if we want to stay ahead, we must adapt." As he presented his ideas, the room filled with an electric energy. He spoke of community engagement, utilizing social media for outreach, embracing collaboration, and building trust. With every point he made, he felt himself growing, like a plant reaching for sunlight. One powerful way to engage would be to involve the community in our development process. Imagine hosting forums or hackathons where individuals can contribute ideas and solutions. "It's not just good business, it's good ethics," he said, letting the weight of his words fill the room. The board listened intently, their expressions shifting from skepticism to intrigue. Susan leaned forward, clearly invested in what he was saying. A boldness surged within him. "I want to lead this change," he stated, each word falling like a stone into a still lake, creating ripples. "I'm committed to this company and its people. I know what it feels like to be just another face in the crowd. I want to change that." He could see his words igniting something in the room, like sparks catching on kindling. "If we can create a culture where everyone feels they belong and contribute, we'll not only improve morale but also enhance productivity," he added, his voice growing even stronger. The discussion continued, and with every back-and-forth dialogue, Daniel felt himself rising, feeding off the energy encapsulated in that room. The atmosphere crackled, brimming with ideas and enthusiasm. But then the inevitable questions surfaced. "Leading is not just about vision, it's about execution," Mark interjected, leaning back with his arms crossed. "How do you plan on facing inevitable pushback?" Daniel met his gaze squarely. "I understand that there will be resistance, but I believe in transparency and open communication." The board continued to deliberate, weighing the pros and cons. Daniel's mind raced as he wondered if he had done enough to convince them. Finally, Susan stood, shaking her head in thought. "This is a big shift for us." He felt a rush of adrenaline. Maybe it was working. Maybe he was finally being seen, being heard. Over the next few days, anticipation became a companion, filling the office like a thick fog. Daniel devoted every free moment to refining his ideas, gathering feedback from colleagues who had once been just faces in the crowd. Each nod, each bit of encouragement fueled his fire. Then came the voting day. The board would decide on his proposal to lead the transformation. The air was thick with tension as Daniel entered the conference room, his mind racing. Could he really change the trajectory not just of his career but of the entire company? As they commenced the vote, Daniel could feel his heart pounding in sync with the ticking clock. He watched as hands raised and fell, anxiously counting them in his mind. Would he be pushing the door ajar to his dream, or would it shut in his face? When the final tally was announced, his breath caught in his throat. "We are excited to announce Daniel as the new president, effective immediately," the chairman proclaimed, and the room erupted into applause. Time seemed to freeze around him. Gratitude washed over him, filling his lungs with the reality of his victory. He had held that elevator door open the moment had been a bridge to this future. As the applause rang in his ears, he felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration, a culmination of all his hard work and dreams. Susan approached him with a smile, her eyes shining. "You did it, Daniel." He nodded, the weight of the title resting on his shoulders, but instead of feeling burdened, he felt empowered. "Thank you for believing in me." Days turned into weeks, and Daniel dove headfirst into his new role. Every morning brought fresh challenges, and he faced them with a sense of purpose. He met with teams, listened to their concerns, and began implementing his vision for the company. Sure, there were bumps along the way, opposition, skepticism, and challenging conversations, but he faced them head-on. He remembered the doubts he had felt just a few weeks ago and how he had pushed through the shadow of uncertainty. With every meeting, every dialogue, he chipped away at the resistance with patience, empathy, and determination. He fostered an environment where everyone felt heard, where change was celebrated rather than feared. Glancing back at the sleek office building that stood tall against the skyline, Daniel reflected on his journey. He began as a man holding a door open, and he had burst through walls of doubt to stand as a leader, a president who believed in possibilities. As he prepared for another meeting, he couldn't help but think of that elevator ride, the moment that ignited his path. Sometimes, all it takes is a small act of courage to open the door to endless possibilities. And sometimes, the world rewards those who dare to hold it open just a little longer. Daniel smiled, gearing himself up for the challenges ahead, knowing that every time he walked through those doors, he was taking another step towards shaping a brighter future, not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in the power of connection, collaboration, and change. The elevator doors were inching their way shut when Daniel's hand shot out, stopping them just in time. He hadn't meant to find himself in this position, not today, not with the board members inside. But here he was, heart racing like a runaway train as Susan, the chairwoman, stepped in, followed by a few other board members. "Thank you," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. Daniel barely nodded, fighting the urge to disappear into the walls. They were formidable, powerful figures, the kind you read about in business magazines, and he was just a man who had dreamed of this moment. As the door slid closed, Daniel felt the palpable tension in the cramped space. This wasn't just an ordinary elevator ride, it was the turning point of his career. Today was the day they would vote on a new president, and he had a lingering hope that the job could be his. Susan's voice cut through the thick air, piercing through his nerves. He hesitated. This was it, the moment to show them he wasn't just an employee, but a leader. "I think we need to innovate," he managed to say, his voice a shaky but determined note in the symphony of business jargon around him. "Our competitors are evolving and we're getting left behind." The elevator began its descent, and as the numbers flicked by, he could see the board members shifting in their seats. Were they actually listening? The tension in his stomach turned to a flicker of hope. Susan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Imagine integrating technology that resonates with younger consumers," Daniel said, gaining momentum. The pitch he had rehearsed in his mind began to pour out. "We need community-based programs, not just products." With each word, Daniel felt lighter, freer even. The thoughts spun in his head like a whirlwind, but he held on tight, determined to steer them in the right direction. As the elevator lurched to a stop on the 10th floor, a few employees entered. He could feel the stares, their eyes filled with curiosity, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he stood taller. "Think about it," he pressed on, looking from board member to board member. "A campaign that makes us a household name. Let's not just sell, let's create a genuine connection." The elevator doors opened, revealing the busy office lobby, but instead of stepping out, Daniel felt a surge of adrenaline. This was his moment, and he wasn't letting it slip away. "Please, let's take this discussion further," he urged, stepping with confidence toward the exit. All eyes were on him now, and something about that felt electric. It stirred something deep within, a realization that he could make them see the potential. As they made their way into the conference room, Daniel felt the whirlwind of emotions, the fear, the hope, the adrenaline, all blending into a palpable force. This wasn't just a presentation, it was the opening act of his career. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with expectation. Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice reverberating gently against the polished surface of the long conference table. "I know this meeting is about new leadership." The board members settled, eyes focused on him. Daniel felt the spotlight zero in. It felt both exhilarating and horrifying. This was it. If he faltered, he wouldn't get another chance. "I've done my homework," he said, his confidence bubbling. He pulled up slides on the projector, showcasing data that highlighted shifting market trends. Younger consumers want authenticity. They're drawn to brands that reflect their values. As Daniel spoke, the board members nodded, some furrowing their brows in thought. He could tell they were processing, considering the weight of his words. "We should focus on community engagement," he continued. "Let's innovate through partnerships and outreach programs." The name Daniel had always felt ordinary, unremarkable in the grand scheme of the corporate hierarchy. But now, as he stood there, he felt like he was carving out a new identity, a leader who had something meaningful to say. His passion crackled in the room, intermingling with the board's initial skepticism. Each nod, each question they posed became a step closer to transforming doubt into belief. Daniel felt the shift taking place. Susan asked, her tone measured but curious. "I want to create a culture that empowers everyone," he replied, meeting her gaze unwaveringly. "I've been in the trenches, I've seen what motivates our team. I want to be the person who listens, who fosters a collaborative environment." The room was charged, and the energy felt almost tangible. Daniel sensed the board's interest peaked, a collective curiosity emerging. They began sparking ideas back and forth, debating potential strategies. Yet beneath the surface, Daniel was still haunted by doubt. What if they saw him as just a dreamer? What if they dismissed his ideas as too radical? But he pressed on, knowing he had to give everything he had to this moment. As discussions intensified, Mark, one of the more conservative board members, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Leading is about more than vision, Daniel. It's about execution." Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach, but gathered resolve. "Change always meets resistance. I'd focus on transparency. The more people feel involved, the less they feel threatened." There was a moment of silence, the board members weighing his answer. Daniel could almost hear the wheels turning in their heads. Then, as if pulling together from a dance of data and emotional weight, they circled back to their core mission, the buzz of ideas illuminating the room around them. The conversation continued, and as they discussed the practicalities of his vision, Daniel could see a shift in Susan's demeanor. She was leaning slightly back now, mulling over something he had said. "There's merit in your ideas, Daniel," she finally said, a small smile creeping onto her face. "You've made a compelling case." "I want to make it easier," he replied, the warmth in his tone spilling over into the room. "Leading is about collaboration. If we build a community that thrives on sharing ideas, it won't just be my leadership, it'll be ours." As various board members exchanged glances, Daniel's heart raced. He felt almost intoxicated by hope, by the potential of what they could create. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Susan stood, crossing her arms pensively. "This is a big shift for us, but I'd like to consider your proposal further." Daniel felt a rush of relief and excitement flood through him. This wasn't just a no, it was an opportunity. As they wrapped up the meeting, he sensed that he had pushed the conversation forward, that his ideas had made a mark. Days turned into a week filled with waiting. There was anxiety hovering in the air, an undercurrent of hope mixed with uncertainty. He poured himself into his work, diving deeper into those ideas, seeking feedback from colleagues and wondering whether he would be able to influence real change. Then came the day of the vote, where the board would decide not just on his proposal, but on his future. Daniel arrived at the conference room with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The stakes had never been higher. "Today, we will vote on leadership changes and our direction moving forward," the chairman addressed the board, his voice steady. Daniel's heart raced as each hand was raised, counting silently in his head. The sound of pens scratching on paper mixed with the weight of their discussions echoed in the silence of the room. When it was finally time for the results to be revealed, the chairman stood up, his expression neutral. The words hit him like a surge of electricity, and the weight of disbelief flooded through him. He could barely process it. The room erupted in applause as Daniel fought back tears, caught between disbelief and joy. Susan approached him, beaming. "Congratulations, Daniel." Stunned but grateful, he replied, "Thank you." With the role came new responsibilities that felt both thrilling and overwhelming. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings and brainstorming sessions. Daniel felt alive, embracing every opportunity to connect with his team and foster an environment of collaboration. But challenges arose, as they always do. Not everyone was ready to embrace change. Some doubted his vision and questioned their futures. The voices of skepticism echoed in his mind, reminding him that even leaders faced opposition. Yet with each encounter, Daniel grew stronger. He was unwavering in his commitment to transparency, originality, and community engagement. He remembered that defining moment in the elevator, the hesitance mixed with the courage to hold that door open. Years passed, and Daniel found himself standing in the same office he had once only dreamed of occupying. One evening, as he flipped through old photographs of the company's origins, he couldn't help but smile. The road had been winding and filled with challenges, but every step had brought him closer to his vision. He recalled the time he'd held the elevator door open, a small act leading to a monumental journey. That single moment had sparked an avalanche of change, not just for him, but for everyone who had believed in collective progress. The thrill of change had only just begun, and as he leaned against the window, looking out at the city below, he knew he had earned his place in this iconic tower. Daniel had become more than just a president. He was a beacon of hope for a company thriving on innovation, collaboration, and a renewed sense of purpose. And sometimes all it takes to change your life is the courage to hold the door open just a little longer. The elevator doors were slowly gliding shut, and in that fleeting moment, Daniel saw his opportunity. With a surge of adrenaline, he shot his hand forward, wedging it between the cold metal. As the doors halted, a mix of determination and surprise washed over him. Standing inside were the very faces he'd admired from a distance, the board members of his company, cold yet formidable. "Thanks for holding the door, Susan," the chairwoman said, stepping in with an air of authority that settled like an iron weight. He barely nodded, feeling tiny, a boy among giants, but curiosity sparked in his chest. Today was different. He didn't want to be just another face in the background. Today he wanted to be seen. As the elevator began its descent, the air thickened with a tension he could almost touch. Today was pivotal. The board was meeting to decide on leadership changes. Deep down, he held a flicker of hope that he could be the one they chose. Susan asked, her eyes pinning him in place, sharp and assessing. A rush of thoughts collided in his mind, but he steadied himself. "I think we need to innovate," he replied, feeling the tremor in his voice but pushing through. "Our audience is evolving." He could sense the board members shifting, leaning in as if the very words had magnetic pull. Each floor ticked down like a countdown, each number flashing by amplifying his resolve. Another board member, Mark, asked. His tone was skeptical, challenging. Daniel seized the moment. "Imagine building community outreach programs that allow us to connect on a deeper level, not just sell a product, but also create a brand people trust." The elevator groaned slightly as it passed the 10th floor. A few employees joined them, whispering and casting glances, feeling the tension in the air. Daniel stood tall, fueled by the energy swirling among them. This was his moment. As they reached the ground floor, Daniel realized he needed to push further. "We have the opportunity to be more than just a company," he asserted. "We could be a movement that resonates with people, something that matters." Susan's eyes sparkled with intrigue. "I like where this is going," she said, encouraging him to keep talking. His heart pounded, but now he felt a rush of clarity. "I want to lead this charge. I understand our employees' desires because I have spent years listening to them." The doors slid open into the bustling office lobby. Instead of scattering back to his desk, Daniel stepped out, not ready to retreat. This was the opportunity he longed for. As they gathered in the conference room, the tension shifted into anticipation. He looked around the table, meeting the serious expressions of the board members. Today, he would not just be the quiet one, he would be the voice for change. "Thank you for allowing me to present," he began, feeling the weight of their scrutiny. "Today, we have the chance to redefine who we are as a company." He laid out his vision, fueled by data and ideas meticulously crafted into a compelling narrative. He spoke of community partnerships, authenticity, and transparency. Each point was bolstered by charts and statistics he had prepared, but more importantly, it came from a place of passion. "With every interaction, we can show consumers that we value their input. We can create events and forums where their voices are heard." As Daniel spoke, the atmosphere shifted. Susan leaned forward, her brow furrowed in thought, while Mark, who had once been skeptical, scribbled notes with interest. Daniel, change is always met with resistance. Mark challenged, his expression serious. Daniel didn't flinch. "I've worked on the ground level, I know the struggles. I want to build a culture where everyone feels involved." Silence hung in the air, but it was a ticking clock of potential, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. You could see his words sinking in, creating ripples of thought among the board members. Then came the pivotal question from Susan. "What qualifies you to lead this change?" He took a deep breath. "Because I am one of them," he said, the conviction rushing from his heart to his voice. "I understand our employees, I empathize with their challenges, I can be their representative, their advocate." The room fell into silence again, but this time it felt charged with possibility. Daniel searched their faces, looking for glimmers of approval. He was threading the needle between hesitation and faith, but deep down he had planted a seed. As they continued deliberating, he sensed something shifting. Ideas flowed like a river, sparking enthusiasm in all corners of the room. Discussions turned lively. He could feel the atmosphere growing warmer, more supportive. Change was taking root. Finally, they turned to voting. The board members exchanged glances, and Daniel could hardly contain his own heartbeat. The votes were tallied, and he felt as if the air around him crackled electric with anticipation. When the chairman stood to announce, time seemed to stretch beyond recognition. "We have reached our decision," he said, his voice steady yet powerful. In an instant, the room erupted into applause, a wave of sound crashing into Daniel as disbelief washed over him. The world blurred for a moment, the excitement swirling around him. Had he really done it? Susan approached him first, her smile bright. "Congratulations, Daniel. You took us somewhere we didn't expect to go." Breathing in the moment, he felt a mixture of disbelief and elation. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Days turned into a whirlwind as Daniel dove into his new role. Every meeting was filled with spirited discussions, and he embraced each moment, eager to put his vision into action. He felt the rush of possibility in every conversation, and the excitement in the office was palpable. However, challenges emerged. Some team members were skeptical, clinging tightly to old routines. The voices of doubt echoed louder than he anticipated, but Daniel stood firm. He had come too far to back down now. Facing opposition became a regular part of his week, yet each time he met resistance, he leaned deeper into collaboration. "Let's brainstorm together," he urged, often holding open forums where anyone could voice concerns or ideas. This became the hallmark of his leadership. He wanted to create a culture of trust where every voice felt valued, knowing that empowerment would breed innovation. Slowly, those who had been skeptical began to open up, sharing their own insights and ideas. Then came the day Daniel received an unexpected email from Mark, requesting a one-on-one meeting. As he entered the coffee shop where they agreed to meet, he felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. This had been the man challenging him at every turn. "Hey Daniel," Mark said, his tone surprisingly warm. "I wanted to talk about some ideas I've been brewing." Daniel felt a surge of gratitude. "That's great to hear, Mark. I'm all about collaboration." As Mark shared his thoughts, Daniel listened intently, realizing how far he had come. He had transformed naysayers into allies through patience and transparency. It was an empowering realization. The seeds he had sown were beginning to bear fruit. Months passed, and the company started seeing the results of their collaborative efforts. Employee engagement soared, ideas overflowed, and customer feedback began to shift positively. Daniel's vision was slowly becoming a reality. One afternoon, as he sat in his office reviewing quarterly reports, laughter spilled into the adjacent conference room. His heart swelled with joy. Employees were collaborating, energizing each other, and it felt so right. Reflecting on the journey, he recalled that day in the elevator, the moment he held the door open, stepping into the unknown with courage. Now he wasn't just a name or a face, he had become a leader, a force for change. Then came the gala, an event to celebrate the company's achievements and the culture they had built together. Daniel stood in front of the crowd, ready to give a speech. He took a deep breath, glancing at the faces that had once looked at him with skepticism. "When I first joined this company, I felt like just another piece of the puzzle. But today I stand before you not just as the president, but as a fellow team member, a partner in our mission." The applause was deafening, filling the room with warmth and gratitude. This was more than a celebration. It was a recognition of the journey they had embarked on together. As he concluded, he couldn't help but think back to that ordinary elevator, a door that had opened into extraordinary possibilities. Holding it open that day had galvanized a movement, one that transformed not just a company but countless lives. With a heart full of pride, Daniel walked off the stage, fully aware that the journey was just beginning. The future was bright, alive with potential, and he was ready to step forward, not just as a leader, but as a beacon of hope for everyone who had ever dared to dream. Sometimes all it takes is one courageous moment holding the door, believing in the possibility, and never looking back. The elevator doors brushed against each other, almost sealed. Just at that moment, Daniel's hand shot out, stopping them with a jolt. Inside were the board members, four of the most important people in the company. Each face was a mixture of surprise and annoyance, but Daniel didn't care. He had always been the quiet one in the back, watched and never seen. Today he would change that. "Thanks for holding the door," Susan, the chairwoman, said, stepping inside. Her confident stride filled the space, and Daniel felt like a kid again, standing next to a giant. His heart raced. As the elevator began its descent, the tension thickened like fog wrapping around them. Today wasn't just any day. The board was meeting to decide on the next president of the company, a title Daniel had secretly dreamed about. He wanted it more than anything, but felt just a nanosecond away from being swallowed in doubt. Susan asked, her sharp gaze landing on him like a spotlight. Daniel hesitated, the words teetering on the edge of his tongue, but the flurry of thoughts racing through his mind gripped him like a tidal wave. "I think we need to innovate," he said finally, his voice shaky but resolute. The board members exchanged glances. Innovate, the very word felt powerful even in his mouth. "Our competitors are lighting fires under us. We need to engage the younger generation. If we don't adapt, we'll fade into the background," he continued, gripping the metallic handrail to steady himself. The elevator lurched downward, each floor flashing by in rapid succession. He could sense the board members listening now, really lending their ears. He built on his thoughts, layering idea upon idea, painting a picture of a revitalized company that could soar if only they took the leap. "Imagine integrating technology that resonates with today's consumers," he said, the words rolling off his tongue more smoothly now. Each word felt like a stepping stone on a bridge he was building right before their eyes. As they approached the ground floor, something shifted in the atmosphere. Susan's expression softened slightly. The corner of Mark's mouth twitched up in what seemed like a hint of a smile. Had they begun to envision it too? The elevator doors opened and they stepped out. Instead of retreating to the safety of his desk, Daniel felt a magnetic pull toward the conference room. He was here, standing among the very people who could change his life. "Please, let's discuss this in the meeting," he urged, stepping forward, his heart pounding against his chest like a drum. The boldness felt foreign and exhilarating. Once they gathered in the conference room, Daniel felt a rush of anticipation as he scanned the board members' faces. He had been preparing for this, a chance to unveil his ideas. "Thanks for your time today," he started, voice steadying. "I recognize the incredible challenges we face in the current market." He launched into his pitch, animated and passionate. He spoke about community involvement, technology integration, and the importance of authenticity. As his words filled the room, he felt like the conductor of an orchestra, leading them with each wave of his hands. People don't want just products, they want brands built on trust and relatability. "We can become a part of their lives, not just a company they buy from," he declared, energy surging through him as he saw the board members nodding, the gears in their minds visibly turning. Every time Daniel glanced at Susan, he sensed her interest deepening. Mark still seemed skeptical, he always did, but that didn't faze him. He pushed on. "Collaboration will fuel our innovations. Let's have forums where ideas are exchanged freely." The atmosphere felt electric as he spoke. He shared statistics, concrete examples, and then boldly he addressed the elephant in the room. "I am eager to lead this transformation," he declared, raising his chin just a notch. "I know what it's like to work hard and feel unheard." The room fell silent, the words hanging above them like thick smoke. Daniel could see doubt in Mark's eyes as well as intrigue in Susan's. Mark cut in, his tone stern yet curious. Gathering his courage, Daniel met his gaze directly. "Because I'm committed to this company and to the people who work here. I know what motivates them, what excites them." As he spoke, he felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. The tension that once filled the air seemed to lift, replaced by a budding curiosity. He could see the dynamics shifting. More discussions unfolded, ideas floated back and forth. The board started to become animated, sparking with creativity, something that hadn't happened in a long time. Daniel could feel the momentum building around him, and he leaned into it, letting the excitement guide him. But then reality broke through. "Change is difficult," Susan said, her expression dropping back into something serious. "It will be met with resistance." Daniel took a deep breath. "Every change faces hurdles, but I believe in transparency and open communication." The board members exchanged nods, the air thick with thoughtful contemplation. For the first time, Daniel felt like he was riding an incredible wave. Finally, Susan shifted. "There's merit in your ideas, Daniel, but we need time to discuss this." Daniel's heart leapt. It wasn't a straightforward yes or no, but it was momentum, a sign they were considering the possibilities. The days that followed were a whirlwind of anticipation. He steered conversations with enthusiasm and passion, eager to gather momentum that could lead to real change. But while Daniel felt hope, impatience crept in on the edges, and then came the day of the vote. As he entered the conference room, a heavy atmosphere surrounded him. The chairs were filled with the board members, their expressions were serious. Daniel felt the weight of their gazes. "Today we will vote on Daniel's proposal and direction for our company," the chairman announced, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Daniel's heart thumped wildly against his ribcage, time seeming to stretch and bend. They raised hands one after the other while he counted silently in his head. Each lift felt like a roller coaster, and soon it was time for the final count. When the chairman stood to announce the results, Daniel could hardly breathe. "We're excited to announce that Daniel will be our new president," he said, the room bursting into applause. Shock swept through him like a tidal wave, leaving a rush of emotions that felt both surreal and exhilarating. The realization washed over him. He had done it. Susan stood up first, her smile warm and genuine. "Congratulations, Daniel. You've proven yourself more than worthy of this role." "Thank you," he replied, overwhelmed. Returning to his desk, he could hardly believe it. The world felt lighter, more filled with possibility. Daniel set to work with newfound energy. Meetings became filled with ideas, collaboration sparked like fireworks, and before long the entire company felt the shift. But the journey wasn't without hurdles. Resistance emerged, as it always does. Some employees clung to the past, skeptical of the direction. Daniel faced challenges, but not without resolve. Instead of backing down, he chose to engage. He initiated one-on-one conversations, listening to concerns, encouraging open dialogue. He wanted his team to feel included, valued, and most importantly, heard. Then came the day of the annual company gala, a chance to celebrate their collective achievements. Standing in front of hundreds of faces, he felt a mix of excitement and nervous energy. "I stand before you today not just as your president, but as a fellow team member," he spoke into the microphone, his voice steady. "Each of us has contributed to our success." The applause echoed through the room like waves crashing against a shore. Daniel could see smiles, nodding heads, and energy radiating from the crowd. In that moment, he truly understood the importance of unity. Reflecting on the journey, he couldn't help but think back to the day he held that elevator door open. It had been a simple act of courage that sparked a ripple effect, leading him to this moment. The laughter and chatter filled the air around him, the atmosphere alive with camaraderie. Daniel felt a sense of pride swell within him. He was no longer just a name in a sea of faces. He was a leader, forging a new path for himself and his company. As the night unfolded, the realization sunk in sometimes. All it takes is a single, brave moment to open the door to countless possibilities, turning dreams into reality. He had held the elevator door just a little longer, and in doing so, he had built a future worth striving for. And as he looked around, he knew he wouldn't take a single moment for granted. The journey had just begun, and he was ready to lead them toward an exciting horizon. The elevator doors were inching shut when Daniel's hand shot out, halting their descent. Heart pounding, he stepped inside, faced with the formidable figures of the board of directors. Each one held years of experience and authority, and he suddenly felt like a child in a room full of giants. "Thanks for holding the door, Susan," the chairwoman said, her tone mix of surprise and mild irritation. As she stepped in, Daniel knew this was more than just any elevator ride. This was a moment that could change his life forever. With a gentle whir, the elevator began its descent, and the air thickened with potential attention filled with ambition and uncertainty. Today was the day of the big meeting, where the board would vote for a new president. Deep down, Daniel clung to a flicker of hope that he might just be the one they chose. Susan prodded, eyes sharp and analyzing. The question hung in the air like a challenge. "I believe we need to innovate," Daniel replied, feeling the weight of the moment. His heart raced, adrenaline coursing through him. He could feel the board members shifting slightly, their interest peaked. The tension in the cramped space started to dissolve just a bit, and with each word, he felt a surprising confidence building within him. As the elevator continued its descent, each passing floor amplified his determination. He was not just an employee anymore, he wanted to be a catalyst for change. "Mark," one of the older board members asked, skepticism creeping into his voice. Daniel took a deep breath, ready to launch into a bold vision. "Let's engage with our audience at a grassroots level. We could host town halls where employees and community members can share their ideas." Suddenly, the door slid open at the ground floor, but instead of escaping back to the safety of the office, Daniel stepped out firmly alongside the board. This was his chance. "Let's talk about how we can take these ideas further," he urged, surprising even himself with his audacity. In the conference room, the atmosphere shifted as they settled in. Daniel looked around the polished table at the keen faces of the board members and felt a thrill shoot through him. This was where he had always wanted to be. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity," he began, pushing down the flutter of nerves. "Today marks an important crossroads for our company. He launched passionately into his presentation, laying out clear, imaginative strategies to connect with modern consumers. With slides reflecting data and projections, he outlined possibilities that edged closer to a dream he had held for years. "What if," he said, gesturing toward the screen, "we become a brand that not only sells products but also supports local entrepreneurship?" He could feel the momentum building as attention shifted. Susan's expression softened, and even Mark seemed slightly intrigued. The air felt electric. It was as though Daniel had flipped a switch, igniting a spark in the room. Mark asked, voice cutting through the enthusiasm like a knife, "I'm committed to this company and its culture. I've listened to my colleagues, worked with them. I understand the pulse of this organization because I've felt it myself," Daniel replied, drawing courage from his experiences. For a brief moment there was silence. Daniel's heart raced as he sensed the hesitation hanging in the air. Would they see him as just another dreamer, or could he convince them to take a chance on him? Susan leaned in, her gaze sharp. "Change is difficult, Daniel. You must understand that." "Resistance is natural," Daniel said, feeling familiarity with the challenge as he spoke. "But what's more important is how we engage." The board began to engage with his vision, and Daniel felt himself rising. Voices danced around him, and the room was filled with a collaborative buzz he hadn't anticipated. They continued to debate and refine, bouncing ideas off each other like a game of tennis. A sense of camaraderie blossomed, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt he was part of something bigger. He could see the wheels turning, the possibilities unfolding like petals of a flower opening to the sun. When the meeting wrapped up, Susan finally spoke, her tone thoughtful. "Let's have a vote. We're faced with a daunting decision today." Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him, tempered with anticipation. It wasn't a clear yes, but it wasn't a rejection either. Each member was processing, weighing the conversation's gravity, a dance of ideas that could change the company forever. Days turned into a week filled with uncertainty as Daniel waited for news, diving into his work while listening for murmurs in the office. He strengthened relationships, reaching out to his colleagues, sharing snippets of his vision and seeking feedback. The more he engaged, the more excitement pulsed through the atmosphere. And then came the fateful day, the day of the vote. The conference room felt charged, each board member seated with expected gravity. Daniel entered, his heart thundering like a drum. "Today we will vote on the direction of our company and whether to appoint Daniel as president," the chairman announced. Sweat beaded on Daniel's brow as the vote began, hands rising one by one. He counted silently in his head, each nod pushing him closer to the edge of his dreams. The room fell quiet, leaving only the sound of shuffling and murmurs. "We will now tally the votes," the chairman said. His eyes scanned the room and a chill swept through Daniel. Would it be enough? Finally, the chairman stood with a solemn expression. "The votes are in." The applause erupted like a volcano, reverberating through the room. Daniel stood frozen, disbelief dancing in his thoughts amidst the celebration. Could this really be happening? He felt a mix of joy and overwhelming realization, like stepping into a spotlight after living in the shadows for far too long. Susan approached him first, her gaze warm. "You've earned this, Daniel. Thank you," he replied, sincerity flooding his voice. With a renewed sense of purpose, he returned to his desk. Excitement crackled around him as he dove into his new role, meetings filled with potential energy. Yet lurking beneath that excitement was another layer of uncertainty. The true test awaited him now. But all that shifted when he noticed resistance beginning to stir within the team. Old beliefs clung stubbornly, and some employees openly questioned his vision, resistant to change. Where he had hoped to find support, doubt began to fester. One employee asked during a department meeting, "We've done fine for years." That question echoed in his mind as Daniel faced the challenges head-on. He realized that each pushback came from a place of fear of the unknown. He recalled the apprehensions he had felt earlier in his career. So he decided to listen instead of leading with authority. He initiated personal conversations with the skeptics. He reached out to the silent ones, determined to understand their perspectives. Empathy became his guiding light amid the storm of doubt swirling around him. Then came the company-wide forum, a platform meant to engage. As he stood at the front of the room, nervous energy gripped him. The eyes of his colleagues were on him, brimming with curiosity. He wanted to make sure his vision resonated rather than being forced upon them. "Today I want to open the floor not just to celebrate our successes but to discuss our future," he began, his voice steady but his heart raced. "What do you want to see?" Hands shot up and Daniel encouraged each voice, welcoming feedback like treasures waiting to be found. Some were hesitant, unsure about the future, while others shared brilliant ideas. Together that day, they crafted a vision that felt all the more compelling, united as a team. But not everyone was convinced. When the topics turned to bold initiatives, skepticism popped up again. In the corner sat Mark, arms crossed, a scowl etched deep on his forehead. "You think everyone is just going to jump on board because you believe in something?" The tension in the room thickened, and Daniel felt the heat of his frustration rising. He understood where Mark was coming from. Change is challenging, and a space filled with uncertainty can breed resistance. But this time he wouldn't back down. "None of this is simple," he said, voice calm but firm. "I'm not asking for blind faith, I'm asking for engagement and collaboration." In that moment, Daniel felt the weight of leadership pressing down on him. It was about more than just him, it was about the team, about creating a space where everyone could feel they belonged. "I don't have all the answers," he confessed, vulnerability washing over him. "But I want to hear your thoughts, understand your fears." Mark met his gaze, and for the first time his expression wavered. The hostility ebbed slightly, replaced by contemplation. Maybe, just maybe, Daniel had finally found a way to sway at least one of the doubters. Days passed and the tide began to turn. What had initially felt like an uphill battle started to feel more like a shared journey. With each new initiative, with every brainstorming session, team members began to rally. They began to celebrate successes together, small wins piling onto one another until hope sparked like a wildfire. Yet shadows lingered. A final pushback loomed on the horizon, the big annual review meeting. High-stakes discussions awaited, and it wouldn't just be about initiatives and ideas. It would also be a showdown between old values and new visions, but this time, Daniel was ready. He gathered his thoughts, prepared himself to face the board and the entire team, fully understanding that their support wouldn't just hinge on presentations, it would depend on their sense of belonging and engagement. The night of the meeting arrived. The room was filled, a hum of nervous energy wafting in the air. Daniel stood at the front, heart pounding, looking out at the faces of his colleagues. This was it, the culmination of his efforts. He took a deep breath, grounding himself. "Tonight we will share our vision for the future," he began, allowing his gaze to drift across the room. As he spoke, he could see Mark seated in the front row, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Daniel felt the weight of that moment. It was a test not just of ideas, but of resolve, of unity. When the floor opened for discussion, the exchange that followed was monumental. Colleagues spoke up, some skeptical, some enthusiastic, each voice touching on different fears and hopes. Daniel welcomed every perspective, every opinion. Then he sensed a shift. The energy in the room swirled, tension gave way to understanding, and for a brief moment there was unity. They were discussing not just numbers or data, but shared goals and aspirations. But just then, as the discussion reached a crescendo, Mark stood up. His expression was serious, a storm brewing behind his eyes. "I have a question," he said, voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "What if this doesn't work?" The room fell into silence, and Daniel felt cold sweat trickle down his back. This was the pivotal moment, the moment that could either crush the wave he had built or set it on fire. All eyes shifted to him. He took a deep breath, the air thick with anticipation. "If we lose ourselves, we must rethink our approach, but I believe we can create a future that honors our past while embracing innovation. We need to evolve or die." A stillness filled the room, and he could feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air. What would happen next could change not only his fate, but that of the entire company. Then, just as he finished speaking, the fire alarm blared to life, piercing the tension like a knife, the lights flashing ominously. Panic surged through the room as people began to rise, talking over one another, an unexpected turning point leaving the fate of everything hanging in the balance. Daniel looked around, heart pounding. Was this coincidence, or had someone planned this? In that moment of chaos, his resolve was clear. He needed to step forward. But how could he manage the fire of uncertainty swirling in the room, and how would he calm the restless fears ignited by the alarm? This was a moment that could unravel everything he'd fought for. The room buzzed with anxiety, and he took a deep breath, ready to face the challenges ahead. As the alarms blared and people rushed toward the exit, one thing was clear. The fire wasn't just in the alarm, the fire was in him, and it was time to lead with purpose. What lay ahead was unknown, but Daniel felt more certain than ever that he was ready to forge a new path, even in the face of chaos.